Welcome to an epic HFY sci-fi journey where humanity refuses to kneel and fights against impossible odds. If you love high-stakes action, tactical battles, and sheer human defiance, you're in the right place. Stick around, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because the fight is just beginning. As you dive into this epic HFY sci-fi journey, one question remains. Does this voice bring the story to life? Does the tone, pacing, and emotion match the intensity of the battle? Or would you prefer a different style for future adventures? Your feedback shapes the future. Let me know your thoughts. Orbit above Earth. Final hours. Admiral Dorian Holt stood on the shattered bridge of the HSS Warhound, watching his homeworld die. Earth was a wounded animal, its surface scarred with burning cities and oceans boiling under orbital bombardment. Xal'Zir dreadnoughts hung in the sky like celestial gods, their weapons tearing through the last human defenses. The fleet was gone. What remained were scraps and ghosts. Survivors, deserters, and the Holt's bloodied hands gripped the command console as another impact rocked the ship. Sparks rained from shattered conduits. Crew members lay dead where they fell, their bodies lifeless amidst flickering emergency lights. They were out of time. "Admiral!" a voice crackled through the chaos. It was Lieutenant Kiera Voss, her uniform torn, her face streaked with sweat and blood. "The last civilian transports have launched, but they won't make it past the blockade unless—" "I know," Holt cut in. His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that came when a man had already accepted his death. The Xal'Zir had underestimated them. That was their first mistake. "Enemy transmission!" The voice of the Dominion, a cold, inhuman voice, echoed across the ruined fleet. "Human Admiral, your world is lost. Surrender and we will grant your kind a swift end. Continue this resistance and you will die choking on the ashes of your race." Holt exhaled slowly, looking at the comms officer. "Patch me through." The lieutenant hesitated. "Sir?" Holt's eyes didn't waver. "Do it." A pause. Then, static cleared and Holt's voice carried across the system, straight to the Xal'Zir warlords. "You think we're afraid of dying?" His voice was iron and fire. "You invaded the wrong species, you arrogant bastards. The last stand, the plan was madness, but Holt had nothing left to lose. "Get every remaining ship into formation," he ordered. "Tight, close range. We make them fight us in the debris field." "But sir, that's an ambush," he finished. They couldn't win, not in a traditional fight. The Xal'Zir were too advanced, too overwhelming, but Holt didn't fight fair. Humans never did. The remaining fleet, crippled battleships, scavenge fighters, barely functional gunships, moved into position. They clustered in the wreckage of Earth's orbital defenses, hiding in the debris of fallen warships. The Xal'Zir wouldn't see them until it was too late. "Arm all remaining torpedoes. Overload the reactors. We hit them hard, fast, and close." There were no cheers, no dramatic speeches, just warriors who knew they were about to die. The Xal'Zir learn what fear means. The execution, not a battle, and that was their second mistake. Holt waited, watched, calculated. When the first warships passed into the kill zone, he whispered, "Fire!" The debris field erupted. Sabotaged reactors detonated like dying stars. Torpedoes screamed into enemy hulls at point-blank range. Xal'Zir ships shattered, their godlike technology torn apart by human desperation. For the first time in millennia, the Xal'Zir felt fear. This was supposed to be a slaughter, not a battle. But the humans weren't playing by the rules. Escape and the last words of a dying alien. The surviving human ships, what little remained, punched through the chaos, running for deep space. Holt stood over a dying Xal'Zir officer in the wreckage of an enemy ship. The alien's golden blood pooled on the deck. Its mandibles twitched as it stared at the human who had defied the gods. "How?" The creature's voice was weak, disbelieving. "We never stood a chance against you humans." Holt holstered his sidearm, looking down at the defeated warrior. "Damn right you didn't." The Warhound jumped to FTL. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Deep space. The aftermath. Admiral Dorian Holt sat in the dimly lit command chamber of the HSC. Warhound staring at the tactical display. They had escaped, but barely. The last remnants of humanity's fleet were scattered across the void, damaged, running low on supplies, and hunted by an enemy that never let prey escape. His knuckles tightened as he gripped the edge of the console. They had bloodied the Xal'Zir. Humans weren't supposed to do that. Now, the enemy would come for them with everything they had. The fleet's condition, one step from collapse. The surviving ships, no more than a dozen battle-worn husks, slipped through deep space. The Warhound, the fleet's last functional battleship, was held together with emergency welds and desperate prayers. 2 destroyers, half their crews dead, trailed behind, barely operational. Several smaller gunships and a few civilian transports made up the rest. Every ship was damaged, low on fuel, and running out of munitions. "Status report," Holt said. Lieutenant Voss scanned the data. She looked worse than before, blood crusted on her temple, her uniform stained with smoke and sweat. "Reactor output is at 40%, she said grimly. "Primary railguns offline, shield emitters are fried, and the med bay is overflowing with casualties." Holt ran a hand down his face. "Survivors." Voss exhaled. "We have less than 5,000 people left across all ships." A cold silence settled over the bridge. Humanity's last fleet. 5,000 survivors. That was all that remained of Earth. The Xal'Zir response, an unrelenting pursuit. The Xal'Zir weren't just angry, they were humiliated. They had sent a fleet to wipe out a primitive species, and instead they had lost ships to a desperate, dying enemy. Now they wanted vengeance. A fleet of Xal'Zir hunter-killers was already in pursuit, moving at faster-than-light speeds, tracking the human survivors through the void. A cold, static-filled transmission intercepted their frequencies. "There is no escape, human. You defied the gods. Now you will be unmade." The chase had begun. Holt's choice: run, fight, or die. The Xal'Zir were faster, stronger, smarter. But Holt had fought impossible odds before, and he knew one universal truth of war. When you couldn't outrun the enemy, you had to outthink them. "Voss," he said, his mind already formulating the next move. "Find us an asteroid field, a gas giant, anything we can use to break line of sight." Voss nodded, scanning star charts. Time was running out. A sensor officer turned pale. "Sir, multiple FTL signatures incoming." Holt clenched his jaw. They had minutes. They wouldn't make it to cover in time, not at their current speed. That left one option, the ambush, making the Xal'Zir bleed again. "All ships prepare for combat," Holt ordered. "We're going to turn and fight." A stunned silence followed. Voss's eyes widened. "Sir, that's suicide." "Maybe," Holt admitted. "But if they think we're running, they won't expect a counterattack." The Xal'Zir believed humanity was broken. That was their third mistake. Holt stared at the tactical display. "Here's what we do." He outlined a desperate, high-risk maneuver, one that relied on timing, misdirection, and pure human defiance. When the enemy dropped out of FTL, expecting to fire on a fleeing fleet, the humans would already be in position to strike first. A trap, the kind only a desperate species would dare to set. The Xal'Zir arrival, a moment of truth alarms blared. Xal'Zir ships dropping from FTL. The enemy fleet emerged, sleek, ominous, invincible, and found themselves face to face with human warships already firing. The Warhound's remaining railgun roared, sending a kinetic slug straight into the lead Xal'Zir destroyer. The shot pounded through shields, shattered armor, and sent the ship spinning into its own reinforcements. Missiles from the crippled human fleet launched in waves, targeting weak points. The first Xal'Zir ships exploded on impact. The rest of the enemy fleet hesitated, just for a moment, and in that moment, Holt made his move. "All ships, burn engines and break through their lines!" The survivors punched through the chaos, slipping past the disoriented enemy fleet. For the second time in this war, humans had done the impossible. They had escaped the jaws of death. Final scene. The war has just begun. As the fleet retreated, Holt stood on the bridge, his expression unreadable. Voss stepped beside him. "Sir, we can't keep doing this." Holt's eyes stayed on the wreckage left behind. "We won't have to," he murmured. Voss frowned. "Why?" Holt turned to her, his voice cold. "Because we're done running. The Xal'Zir thought they were the hunters. They were wrong. Now it was humanity's turn to strike back. Deep space. After the ambush, Admiral Dorian Holt sat in his war-torn command chair staring at the tactical map. The Xal'Zir should have wiped them out by now. Instead, they were licking their wounds. That meant one thing. We have their attention. The surviving remnants of humanity's fleet floated in the aftermath of their second impossible victory. The battle-scarred Warhound led the crippled destroyers and gunships deeper into unknown space, engines barely holding together, but they weren't running anymore. Holt leaned forward. His mind was already calculating their next move. "Sir," Lieutenant Voss said, stepping up beside him. "What's the plan?" Holt's steely gaze met hers. "We take the fight to them." The shift from prey to predator. The Xal'Zir had spent centuries crushing species beneath their boot. They had never fought a war of attrition. They had never faced an enemy that didn't break. But humanity? Humanity had survived its own extinction more than once. Wars, disasters, genocide, collapse. Humans endured. That was the one advantage they had over the Xal'Zir. Holt wasn't going to let that advantage go to waste. "If we keep running, they'll hunt us down one by one," he told his officers. "So we don't run, we make them bleed." A cold silence followed. Then, a slow, knowing nod from every battle-worn survivor. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to make the bastards suffer. The next target. Xal'Zir supply lines. The Xal'Zir had never needed true logistics before. They had fleets so vast, so advanced, that they conquered entire systems in days. Their war machine had never been forced into a long, grinding conflict. But now? Holt was about to introduce them to the horrors of asymmetric warfare. "Find me their supply lines," he ordered. Voss nodded. "Scanning now. Got something. There's an orbital fuel depot near the Epsilon Theta system." Holt's lips curled into a wolfish grin. "Perfect. We burn it to the ground. The infiltration. Striking from the shadows." The human fleet cut engines, drifting cold and silent through the void. The Xal'Zir fuel depot floated in the distance, an enormous station lightly defended. They didn't expect an attack. Why would they? Humanity was supposed to be dead. Holt turned to his tactical officers. "We get in close, launch boarding teams, and overload their reactors." Voss smirked. "Old school sabotage. I like it." The boarding action human drop pods launched from the Warhound, streaking toward the Xal'Zir station like falling stars. Inside, Holt and his team gripped their weapons, breathing steady. "On my mark." Impact. Metal screamed as human soldiers breached the station, flooding its corridors like specters of death. The Xal'Zir never saw them coming. Holt's rifle snapped upward, dropping an alien guard with a single shot. Behind him, his strike team moved with ruthless efficiency, sweeping through the station, planting charges, hacking into systems. Xal'Zir warriors rushed to respond, but they were too slow. Humanity had mastered the art of war in the shadows. Within minutes, the entire station was rigged to detonate. Holt stood over a captured Xal'Zir officer, pressing a boot against its chest. "You thought we were prey?" he growled. The alien trembled. Holt activated his comms. "All teams, get clear, light it up." The explosion heard across the galaxy. The Xal'Zir watched in disbelief as their own fuel depot erupted into a firestorm, detonating with the force of a small sun. Shockwaves rippled through space, a symbol of Xal'Zir invincibility reduced to wreckage. And the humans? They were already gone. The Dominion's warlords screamed in rage. Humanity had just done the impossible. Again. The war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Xal'Zir Prime. The throne of the conquerors across the void, in the heart of the Xal'Zir Dominion, the supreme warlords gathered. For millennia, their empire had been unrivaled, unchallenged. Yet now, a primitive species had defied them. Not just once, but twice. The chamber was a cathedral of war, lined with the skulls of extinct civilizations. Every species that had resisted the Xal'Zir had been erased, their bones displayed as eternal reminders of failure. And yet, no human skulls lined these walls, because humanity had not been defeated. "How is this possible?" hissed Warlord Zarkan, his golden exoskeleton glinting in the dim light. Their fleets were destroyed, their homeworld burned. Another growled. A deep rumbling voice silenced the chamber. High Lord Xyrith, the supreme ruler of the Dominion, leaned forward, his many eyes narrowing. Humans are not warriors. They are vermin. And vermin infest. His gaze locked onto a holographic projection of Admiral Dorian Holt. This human is dangerous. He turned to his fleet commanders. I want his head. Burn every system he touches, leave nothing but ruins. The greatest armada the Dominion had ever assembled moved to war. The trap. The Xal'Zir changed tactics. Holt knew the Xal'Zir would retaliate, but even he underestimated how quickly they would strike back. The Warhound and the remnants of the human fleet had been running silent, avoiding direct conflict after their latest raid. They had just begun planning their next move when disaster struck. Admiral! Voss shouted, alarms blaring. We have incoming, multiple FTL signatures. Holt's stomach dropped. The tactical map exploded with red markers. Not a hunting squad, not a blockade. An entire Dominion fleet. They had been waiting, tracking them. And now the Xal'Zir had sprung the trap. The battle fighting a godlike enemy. All ships! Evasive maneuvers, now! Holt roared. The Xal'Zir descended like wrath incarnate. Massive war beasts, biomechanical horrors the size of dreadnoughts, surged forward. Cloaked hunter-killers blinked in and out of existence, striking from every angle. Swarming drones flooded the void, filling every escape vector with death. The Warhound shook violently as energy lances ripped into its hull. A human gunship erupted into fire, debris spiraling into the abyss. They weren't winning this fight. They weren't even surviving it. Holt's choice. The only way out is through. There was one chance, one impossible maneuver. Holt's eyes locked onto a nearby neutron star, its gravitational pull like a monstrous abyss. Voss, he said, dead serious. She followed his gaze and went pale. No, that's suicide. It's our only way out. He slammed a fist onto the comms. All ships, course correction. We slingshot around that star. If they follow, they burn. The impossible escape. The fleet turned hard, engines burning at full capacity. The neutron star's gravity caught them, dragging them at insane velocities. Xal'Zir ships followed. Too confident, too aggressive, and that was their final mistake. As the human fleet slingshot around the gravity well, the Xal'Zir weren't fast enough to adjust. Their own momentum betrayed them. Half the pursuing fleet was torn apart, crushed by gravitational forces, ripped into oblivion. The human fleet shot out the other side, barely intact, but alive. Holt exhaled sharply, gripping the console. They had survived. Again, but next time they wouldn't run. They'd make the Xal'Zir pay. The ashes of war. The Warhound limped through the void, its hull scorched, its crew running on fumes. For days they had been on the run, dodging Xal'Zir hunting parties. For days Holt had been planning, calculating, waiting. Now it was time to stop running. Admiral, Voss said, stepping up beside him. Where do we go from here? Holt's eyes were cold, unshaken. We stop surviving. He turned to the bridge crew. We start fighting. The plan striking at the heart. Humanity had no fleet, no home, no reinforcements. But they still had their minds. Holt had studied the Xal'Zir's tactics, their movements, their weaknesses, and he had found a crack in their armor. They're overextended, he told his officers. Too confident, too spread out. We hit them where they don't expect it, the first target. A Xal'Zir command station near the burned-out remains of the Epsilon Draconis system. A Xal'Zir forward command station orchestrated their sector-wide occupation. It was heavily fortified, but not against small, precise strikes. The Xal'Zir never planned for guerrilla warfare. Holt grinned. That was their mistake. We take that station, we take their communications, we intercept orders, we learn everything. Voss frowned. And if they reinforce? Holt's grin widened. Then we send them a message. The infiltration, ghosts in the dark. The human fleet cut engines, approaching the station in complete silence. Stealth teams, former special forces, engineers and survivors willing to kill for vengeance, launched in modified civilian shuttles giving off no heat signatures. Inside, Xal'Zir officers monitored their empire's vast dominion, unaware of death moving in their shadow. Holt himself led the strike. His boots hit the station's cold floors. His rifle was already raised. "This is for Earth." The assault. A species that refuses to die. The first Xal'Zir never saw them. A silenced shot tore through its skull, golden blood spraying across the console. Then the humans moved fast. Sentries dropped like stones, taken out with blades, suppressed fire, brutal efficiency. Holt and his team breached the control center, hacking into the Xal'Zir systems. Data flooded their screens, fleet positions, supply routes, the locations of other surviving human colonies. Voss gasped. "Sir?" "There are survivors, scattered across the outer reaches." Holt's grip on his rifle tightened. "Then we're not alone." They weren't just fighting for revenge anymore. They were fighting for their people. The Xal'Zir response, too little, too late, alarms blared. Xal'Zir shock troopers stormed the halls, responding to the breach. Holt's team held the line, gunning them down in ruthless close-quarters combat, but they couldn't hold forever. "Sir, reinforcements inbound," Voss shouted. Holt activated his comms. "All teams, evac, now. We got what we came for." Explosives detonated across the station, sending Xal'Zir bodies and machinery spiraling into the void. The humans escaped into the darkness, leaving the Dominion blind, bloodied, and furious. The message, "Humanity fights back," across the Dominion. Xal'Zir warlords watched in disbelief as one of their command stations burned. Then, a broadcast hijacked their frequencies. Holt's face appeared on every Xal'Zir screen, his voice like a death knell. "You thought we were extinct. You thought we were broken. You were wrong. We are humanity, and we are coming for you." The broadcast cut, and across the stars, for the first time in Xal'Zir history, the warlords felt fear, humanity's first offensive. For the first time since the fall of Earth, the Xal'Zir weren't the ones setting the terms. Admiral Holt stood on the bridge of the Warhound, staring at the star charts. The data stolen from the Xal'Zir command station had changed everything. There were human survivors. They were being hunted, experimented on, or enslaved. And now humanity had the locations of the Xal'Zir war factories. The Dominion had no idea how dangerous that information was. Holt's hands clenched into fists. "We have two choices," he said, addressing his officers. "We either run and hide," his voice turned hard as steel, "or we make them regret ever coming for us." A silence fell over the bridge. Then Voss smirked. "I say we make them bleed." The fleet officers nodded grimly. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive anymore, they were fighting to win. The target, the Xal'Zir war foundry on Corvallis 3. The Xal'Zir didn't build ships the way humans did. Their war foundries were living factories, massive biomechanical structures that grew warships, hatching them like eggs from molten cores. Corvallis 3 was one of the largest, producing warships that had ravaged Earth. Taking it down wouldn't just be a victory, it would be revenge. The battle plan. The fury of the forgotten Holt knew they couldn't fight the Dominion in a traditional battle, so they wouldn't. Instead, he devised a plan so insane, so impossible, the Xal'Zir would never expect it. A small strike team would infiltrate the foundry's core. They would plant a chain reaction bomb, overloading the entire structure. The remaining human ships would distract the defenders, engaging in a high-speed assault to keep the Xal'Zir occupied. Holt turned to his officers. "We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and when we leave..." His eyes burned with defiance. "There won't be a foundry left." The infiltration, the heart of the beast, Holt himself led the infiltration team, because this mission was personal. The drop pods punched through the foundry's defenses, embedding into the organic metal. As the hatches blew open, Holt and his strike team spilled into the corridors, weapons raised. Inside, the Xal'Zir were unprepared. Security was light. They weren't expecting an attack so deep in their territory. That was their first mistake. Holt's rifle barked. Golden blood splattered the walls. His team moved with lethal efficiency, clearing every chamber as they advanced toward the foundry's reactor core. The air was thick with heat, smoke, and the unnatural hum of biomachinery. And then, they found it. The pulsating core, surrounded by tendrils of raw energy, birthing warships from liquid metal. Holt planted the charge. "Detonation in 5 minutes." Now came the hard part, getting out alive. The distraction, fire in the void outside, the warhound and its fleet roared into battle. Human railguns thundered, shredding through the Xal'Zir defenses before they could react. Missiles slammed into the foundry's exterior, rupturing its growth pods. The Xal'Zir scrambled to respond, and in their chaos they didn't see the strike team escaping. That was their second mistake. The explosion. Humanity's vengeance, Holt's team reached their escape ship just as the bomb hit zero. A low rumble built from within the foundry's core. Then, the entire structure detonated. A wave of fire erupted from the station's heart, tearing through its walls, consuming the entire foundry in a chain reaction of destruction. From orbit, the surviving human fleet watched as one of the Dominion's greatest war factories collapsed in on itself. Gone. A piece of the unstoppable war machine. Erased. The mission was a success. Holt exhaled. Let's go home. The Xal'Zir's horror. The war had changed across the Dominion. Xal'Zir warlords watched in stunned silence as one of their most sacred foundries burned. A species they had written off as exterminated had just crippled their war machine. High Lord Xyraphi's many eyes narrowed in rage. This cannot be. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Xal'Zir realized they weren't fighting prey anymore. They were fighting a species built for war. The cost of war. The warhound drifted through the void, its crew exhausted but victorious. They had struck the Dominion, harder than anyone thought possible. But there was no time to celebrate. Voss stood beside Holt, watching the wreckage of the destroyed war foundry fade into the distance. "We hit them where it hurts," she said. "But it won't be enough. Not yet." Holt nodded. "We're not done." Then she hesitated. "Sir, about the survivors." Holt turned to her, his expression unreadable. The data they had stolen from the Xal'Zir confirmed what he feared. Humans had been captured, enslaved, experimented on. And the Dominion hadn't bothered hiding it. They thought no one was left to care. That was their last mistake. The objective, a rescue mission. No one would dare attempt. The Xal'Zir didn't take prisoners, not in the way humans did. To them, a conquered species had two fates: become fodder for genetic experiments, or be forced to serve as labor for their war machine. But now, Holt had a name: Xarthak Prime, the Dominion's largest labor camp. Thousands of captured humans were being worked to death on an inhospitable planet, breaking down wrecked ships and mining volatile resources to fuel the Xal'Zir war effort. No one had ever escaped. No one had ever dared try. Until now. The plan. The most reckless attack yet. Holt gathered his officers. "We're going in." They didn't question him. They didn't ask why. They already knew. Humanity didn't leave its own behind. "We'll need to hit them fast," Voss said, scanning the data. "In and out before they realize what's happening." "Negative," Holt said. "We're not just getting the prisoners out. We're burning the whole damn place to the ground." A pause. Then, slow. Vicious grins spread across the officers' faces. They were in. Xarthak Prime, the prison of the damned. Xarthak was a hellhole. A dead planet with a toxic atmosphere, its surface covered in metallic graveyards of dismantled warships. The prison complex was massive, ringed with energy barriers and defense turrets. Above, Xal'Zir warships patrolled the skies, watching for any escape attempts. The guards didn't even consider the possibility of an attack. After all, who would dare? Then, the first explosion hit. The attack. The wrath of the forgotten. The warhound and its fleet descended like specters, tearing through the outer defenses with brutal precision. Gunships dropped strike teams onto the prison towers, silencing alarms before they could ring. Inside, the prisoners stirred, humans, emaciated but unbroken, looking to the skies with disbelief. They thought they were forgotten. They were wrong. The rebellion ignites. Holt led the charge himself, boots pounding against metal as he and his team breached the main compound. Guards rushed to respond, but they had never fought humans with nothing left to lose. The corridors ran slick with golden alien blood. One of the prisoners, a former Marine captain, stared at Holt in shock. "Admiral, we thought Earth was gone." Holt reloaded his rifle. "It is." Then he tossed the captain a weapon. But humanity isn't. The captain caught the gun. Then, for the first time in years, he and the prisoners fought back. The Xal'Zir expected obedience. Instead, they got an uprising. The evacuation, hellfire, and vengeance. As the Xal'Zir scrambled to contain the chaos, the human fleet opened the sky. Railguns ripped apart guard towers. Missiles obliterated energy barriers. Escape ships descended onto the prison yards, hauling as many prisoners as they could. But Holt wasn't done. He activated his comms. "Light it up." Voss grinned. With pleasure. Explosives detonated across the prison, collapsing its command centers, burying the guards, erasing any trace of the Dominion's control. Zarthak Prime, the symbol of humanity's enslavement, was no more. As the last ships lifted off, Holt took one last look at the wreckage. "That's for Earth, you bastards!" The aftermath. Fear in the Dominion across the galaxy. The Xal'Zir reeled in horror. A species they had already written off had just destroyed a war foundry, freed prisoners that should have died, turned the Dominion's own slaves against them. It wasn't just a rebellion anymore. It was a war, and for the first time, the Xal'Zir truly understood what they were facing. Not prey, not victims, not a dying race. They were fighting humans, and humans don't stop. The call to war. The bridge of the Warhound was dim, its surfaces scorched from battle, its systems barely holding together. But despite the damage, the ship was alive, just like the species it carried. Admiral Dorian Holt stood at the center, studying the holographic star map. Red markers spread across the display. Xal'Zir strongholds, fleet movements, extermination zones. They were losing control. Humanity had done the impossible, crippling the Dominion's war machine. Now, it was time to shatter the Empire completely. Voss approached, her face grim. "Sir, the last resistance cells are responding. They're ready." Holt exhaled slowly. "Then we bring them together." The War Council, humanity's final stand aboard the ruined remains of an abandoned space station. Holt's fleet gathered the last human war leaders. They were soldiers, exiles, warlords, the last remnants of Earth's fallen armies, now leading scattered survivors. Some were from hidden colonies, still untouched by war. Others had lived in the shadows for years, striking the Xal'Zir like ghosts. Now, for the first time, they stood together. Holt's voice was iron and fire. "We've fought them for scraps. We've run. We've bled. And now? Now we break them." Silence. Then a grizzled veteran stepped forward, a former admiral of the Sol Defense Fleet. "How?" he growled. "They still outnumber us 1,000 to 1. Holt's eyes burned. "Because we don't fight like them. We don't fight fair. We fight to win." He pointed to the Xal'Zir homeworld, glowing at the center of the map. "We take the war to their throne. We burn the heart of the Dominion." Murmurs of disbelief. A direct assault on the Xal'Zir core systems? Madness. Then Voss spoke. "They think we're weak. They think we'll keep striking at the edges. That's why we hit them where they least expect it." Slowly, the warlords nodded. This wasn't just a battle. This was vengeance. Humanity's last uprising had begun. The invasion plan, the most dangerous gambit. Holt outlined a plan so reckless, so impossible, that it just might work. A small fleet of human warships would strike the Dominion's outer defenses, creating the illusion of another raid. Meanwhile, a second fleet, cloaked, silent, would slip through a hidden hyperspace route, appearing above the Xal'Zir homeworld. There, a strike team would infiltrate the High Command's fortress, assassinate the Xal'Zir leadership, and cripple their ability to coordinate the war. With their empire leaderless, the Xal'Zir fleets would turn on each other. Chaos, rebellion, collapse, a death blow. "This is it," Holt said. "We win here or we die. There's no retreat." No one hesitated. Humanity never backed down. The Xal'Zir's final weapon, the Endbringer fleet. But the Xal'Zir were not idle. High Lord Xyrophis had seen the pattern. The humans were closing in, and so he prepared his final weapon, the Endbringer fleet. A force so vast, so destructive, that no civilization had ever survived its wrath. If humanity attacked the Xal'Zir homeworld, the Endbringers would wipe them from the galaxy. At least, that's what the Dominion believed. Because they still didn't understand what they were fighting. They thought humanity was afraid of death. They thought this would break them. They were wrong. Holt wasn't leading a fleet to survive, he was leading a fleet to win. The final journey. The human fleet was small, battered and outnumbered, but it moved like a storm, cutting through the void with purpose. At its heart, the Warhound led the way, its hull scarred from years of war, its crew prepared for their final battle. Inside, Admiral Holt stood before his officers, every eye locked on him. "This is it," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "The war ends here, one way or another." Silence. Then, from every soul on that ship, a quiet, unshakable nod. Approaching the Xal'Zir homeworld. Xal'Zir Prime was a fortress world, its surface covered in towers of bone metal, burning skies and planetary defense grids that had never been breached. Above, the Endbringer fleet loomed, Xal'Zir's ultimate weapon, a force built not to conquer, but to exterminate. It had only been deployed once before to erase a species from history. Now it was pointed at humanity. The feint humanity's last trick. As planned, the first human fleet struck the outer systems. A brutal, fast-moving raid, drawing Xal'Zir defenses away from the homeworld. Xal'Zir commanders laughed. Another desperate strike from a dying species. They rushed reinforcements to the battle. That was their final mistake. Because the real attack had already begun. A silent approach, slipping through the defenses Holt's strike force, just 6 warships. Slid through the void, using a hidden hyperspace corridor the Xal'Zir thought too unstable to navigate. The Dominion had never needed stealth. They had never fought an enemy that used deception as a weapon. But humans? Humans were born from war. When the fleet exited slip space, they were already inside the homeworld's defensive perimeter. The enemy didn't even see them coming. Planetfall boots-on-the-ground drop pods roared through the atmosphere, slamming into the capital city of the Xal'Zir Dominion. Holt hit the ground running, rifle up. His team, a mix of spec ops, rebels and survivors, moved like ghosts, eliminating Xal'Zir guards before alarms could sound. The objective was clear: assassinate the High Lords. Decapitate the Dominion in the war. The throne of the Dominion. The Xal'Zir warlords were waiting. A trap. Blades of plasma ignited. Elite Xal'Zir warriors, their bodies enhanced beyond biological limits, closed in. Holt did not hesitate. Gunfire erupted. The fight was brutal, desperate, close quarters. For every human that fell, 2 Xal'Zir followed. Voss went down, injured but alive. Holt's rifle clicked empty. A towering Xal'Zir warrior lunged. Holt drew his combat knife and met it head-on. The fight ended in blood. Holt stood. The Xal'Zir did not. The High Lord's final words in the throne room. Holt found High Lord Xyrophis watching the battle rage in orbit. The human fleet was dying, but the Xal'Zir were breaking. Holt raised his weapon. The High Lord laughed. "You are not gods," Xyrophis hissed. "You should not have won." Holt's eyes burned with fire. "We never needed to be gods." He pulled the trigger. A single shot ended the Xal'Zir Dominion. The fall of an empire with their High Lords dead, the Dominion fractured instantly. The Endbringer fleet turned on itself, ships splintering as commanders fought for control. Entire planets rose in rebellion. Holt staggered outside, watching the sky burn. The Xal'Zir, the gods of war, were gone, and in their place stood humanity, broke-scoured, unstoppable, the ashes of an empire. The skies above the Xal'Zir homeworld burned. What was once the seat of an unstoppable empire had become a graveyard of shattered warships and burning ruins. Holt stood on the balcony of the High Lord's citadel, his armor scarred and blood-stained, his rifle slung across his back. The war was over, but victory had never felt so hollow. Voss limped up beside him, her arm wrapped in a makeshift sling. She looked over the ruins, the bodies of Xal'Zir warlords and soldiers alike littering the once pristine throne world. "It's done," she said. Holt didn't respond. He was watching the few surviving Xal'Zir, those who had surrendered, kneeling before the human soldiers. For centuries, They had enslaved, exterminated, and erased entire civilizations. Now they were the ones begging for mercy. The choice: justice or annihilation. A group of survivors from Earth, hardened by war, stood with their weapons raised. "We should kill them," one of them spat. "Every last one." The words hung heavy in the air. Holt had fought this war for revenge, for survival, for justice. But now, standing at the edge of victory, he realized something. Humanity had always been defined not by how it fought, but by what it became afterward. The Xal'Zir had ruled through fear, cruelty, and total domination. If humanity followed that same path, then what had they fought for? Holt exhaled and turned to his soldiers. No. The crowd fell silent. "We were never prey," Holt said, "but we were never monsters either." He looked at the kneeling Xal'Zir. "They don't deserve our mercy." His voice was iron and fire. "But we will not become them." He turned to the remnants of his fleet. "Let the galaxy know. Humanity fights. Humanity endures. But humanity does not slaughter the weak." The broadcast humanity's ascendance across the galaxy. Every surviving species watched. The transmission from Xal'Zir Prime was broadcast to every world, every system, every Dominion-held planet. They saw the ruined empire. They saw the last Xal'Zir warlords kneeling in defeat. And they saw Holt's final words to the galaxy: "We were never prey. You thought we would kneel. You thought we would break. You thought we would die in the dark. You were wrong. We are humanity, and we will never be conquered again." The aftermath. A new galactic order. The Dominion was gone, but the galaxy was forever changed. The surviving human fleets gathered in the Outer Rim, now the most feared force in existence. Former enslaved species rose in rebellion, inspired by humanity's defiance. Xal'Zir space became lawless, fractured, a dying empire reduced to nothing. And humanity? Humanity had no homeworld, no central government. But it didn't need one. It had become something new. A force that could never be erased again. The final scene. Holt's last order. As the ruins of Xal'Zir Prime settled into silence, Holt walked through the remains of the High Lord's throne room. A young officer approached. "Admiral, what now?" Holt looked to the stars. The war was over, but the galaxy was wide, dangerous, and full of unknown threats. He exhaled. "We rebuild. We remember." Then his voice hardened. "And we stay ready. Because if history had taught him anything, this would not be the last war. And this time, humanity would not be caught unprepared. Humanity has won, but at a great cost. The Xal'Zir are defeated, but the galaxy is still dangerous. And Holt? He's not done fighting yet. The war may be over, but the story never truly ends. What would you have done in humanity's place? Would you show mercy, or make them pay? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more battles, betrayals, and brutal victories, hit that subscribe button. The next fight is just beyond the stars. This story was brought to life with this voice. But is it the best fit? Did the tone, pacing, and emotion match the intensity of the story? Or would you prefer a different style for future adventures? Let me know your thoughts. Your feedback shapes the future of these epic tales.